I've lost almost 80 pounds on the ketogenic diet so far. Still got a ways to go, and I feel better than I've ever felt anytime I've tried to lose weight. But every time you turn on the news or open another magazine, or nobody reads magazines anymore, open up a news article, ketogenic diet is either heaven sent, hallelujah, or it's, oh my gosh, it's from the pits of hell. That's a pretty big contrast of opinions. So before you make up your mind, let's talk about the ketogenic diet and why it might just be right for you. Coming up next on Pursuit for Better. So this is the first part of a series that I'm going to do that covers an overview of the entire ketogenic diet. And before I begin, let me just say I'm not a doctor, I'm not giving out medical advice. I'm just going to tell you about my firsthand experience, what I've been doing, how I've been doing it, the effects it's had on me, both positive and negative, and how it just might work for you. But obviously, because I'm not a doctor, you might want to get your doctor's opinion before you start a diet like this. Another thing is, this is just going to be a very high-level view. There's a lot of other videos out there from people that are a whole lot smarter than me that you can go out and you can YouTube and watch them that are going to give you a much deeper level of scientific information than what you're probably going to get from me. I just want to give you a high-level overview about what this diet's all about. So before we dive in, I'd like to ask you to hop over to my channel, subscribe if you haven't yet, drop a like on the video, and then down below, drop a comment, and let's have a conversation about some of this stuff. Let's see if we're dealing with any other misconceptions or things that we might be able to clear up together. So let's begin by talking about the standard American diet, where the primary macro is all about carbohydrates. Carbohydrates, which turn into glucose, which is just another form of saying sugar. Glucose or sugar is burned very rapidly by our bodies, and it's stored very easily by our bodies. And in the sense of it being burned very quickly, tell me how many of you have had that experience of the sugar high and then the inevitable sugar crash right below there? How many times you've been sitting around your office at maybe 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and you maybe just had a high sugar snack, and before you know it, you're sitting there trying to keep your eyes open, almost passed out. And since glucose is stored so easily, it adds to your fat content with very little effort of your body at all. The biggest issue overall is that when these carbs turn into glucose and spike our blood sugar, we have this huge insulin spike throughout our body. And just as a side note, in the presence of insulin, your body will not burn fat. Just know it. If insulin is present, your body is not going to burn fat. So see if you can follow me here for a minute. Because most of our meals are a majority of carbohydrates, and then carbohydrates turn into glucose, glucose spikes our insulin, and in the presence of insulin, we don't burn fat. Is it any wonder why America is becoming larger and larger, the obesity rates are going through the roof, and more Americans are heading that way each and every day? I've spent 20 years of my life overweight, and this describes me to a T. Now, one of the big concerns here is that over a period of time, as we deal with these insulin spikes that are in our body all the time, we get into a place where we start to get what's called insulin resistant. This means that your body no longer pays attention to those insulin signals and glucose builds up in your blood. And what happens when glucose builds up in your blood? You end up with high blood sugar. And as we all know, that's what typically leads to type 2 diabetes. Now, as I said before, this is a very high-level view of this. Again, I'm trying not to get really scientific here, and I probably couldn't even if I wanted to. But the bottom line is that the way that we eat right now through the standard American diet triggers this insulin response in our bodies. We become insulin resistant because it's happening so often, and there's so much of a presence of that in our blood that there's no wonder why we either can't burn fat because insulin is present at all times, or we're ending up with all these other kind of diseases, type 2 diabetes being one of the main ones. As a side note, one of the other difficulties that happens when your body is in this presence of insulin all the time is that it also results in inflammation. We're talking inflammation of your blood vessels, we're talking inflammation of your joints, basically inflammation throughout your entire body. Most people get to a point of where they just get used to living in a state of inflammation. That was pretty much me. You get used to living in a state of pain. You wake up in the morning, everything in your body hurts, your joints hurt, you feel like crap all the time. Most of that you're feeling is your body being in a state of inflammation. Isn't it such a good thing that a new drug comes out every week to help us treat a new disease that we didn't even know we had? Alright, so now let's get into the actual ketogenic diet itself. And the goal, as far as I'm concerned, is to turn everything that I just said on its head. What the ketogenic diet does for you is it makes your body to where it burns fat for fuel instead of glucose. In the presence of no or extremely low carbohydrates, your body will produce ketones, and ketones are one of the triggers that help your body get to a point where it can start burning fat for fuel instead of glucose or carbohydrates or sugar. When this happens, your body literally changes the mitochondria, or the structure of the cell, to where it will actually begin to prefer using fat as a fuel rather than glucose. This is actually what's called becoming fat adapted. This means that your body will now preferentially choose to use fat as a fuel as adverse to glucose or carbohydrates. The incredible side effect of this is that your blood sugars almost immediately begin to get more in control, and probably the biggest thing that I have found that's probably the biggest benefit for me is reduced inflammation across your entire body. I've probably shared this in other videos, or I probably will in another time, but literally 4 to 5 days into doing the ketogenic diet, I woke up for the first time, my knees didn't hurt, my shoulder didn't hurt, which both of these things had bothered me for years. And so I knew right away that my body was becoming less and less inflamed right from the beginning. So as I mentioned, with the ketogenic diet, your primary fuel is fat. Now, just for the record, I mean healthy fats. There is a clean keto and a dirty keto, and I will make a whole nother video about that another time. But for right now, just know for the record that when I'm talking about jumping into the ketogenic diet and eating fat for fuel, I'm talking about clean fats. Okay, we're talking about things like olive oil, avocados, macadamia nuts, coconut oils, MCT oils, those types of oils that are much more healthy. They're basically They're not processed. They don't have to go through some huge chemical treatment or everything else. They're basically just healthy fats that you can use in your diet. Now, let's talk about this for a second. One of the main reasons why the ketogenic diet gets such bad press is because of what happened way back in the 70s. This war on fat that happened based on one study that was not even made of really good clinical data, all of a sudden started this huge scare that fats are horrible, fats are evil, fats are bad, let's get off of fat, we have to go with the low fat everything, low fat everything, low fat everything. Here's how crazy this got. I actually would go into the store, this is when I was still massively overweight, and I would literally buy jelly beans off of the shelf because it said this is a low-fat food. Now, what's crazy isn't it interesting that the more we have gone into this low-fat, no-fat, get away from fat, fats are evil, that over the last couple of decades, that America as a whole, as a culture, has become less and less healthy. We've become more and more overweight, all at the same time decrying that fats are evil. What in the heck happened here? My great-grandfather, who lived well into his 90s, pretty much every single day made it a staple to eat eggs, bacon, sausage. He'd eat, just tons of red meat, never had an issue at all. So what in the world's going on here? My guess is you can probably think back to some of your family members that have done the same thing. Why is it all of a sudden everything was going great for them, and then when we started this war on fat, things started to go downhill in a hurry? We can discuss that another time. So the whole point about the ketogenic diet is all about the macros at this point. So instead of having carbohydrates as your main fuel source, we're talking about fats as the main fuel source. Just to talk about the macros a little bit here, how they're generally broken down for the ketogenic diet is you're looking at about 70 to 75% fats. And again, we're talking healthy fats, and we'll get into a meal breakdown maybe in another video. We're talking about 20 to 25% protein and about 5% carbohydrates. Now, I do want to point out that I said 5% carbohydrates, but all in all, really, no matter what amount, because we're talking about a percentage here for a minute, but regardless of how many calories you're eating when you first start off, you really do want to try to do everything you can to keep your carbohydrates really between 25 and 30 grams and lower when it comes to your day-to-day meals. Now, that is a very low amount. When you pull up a loaf of bread, for example, one loaf of bread can have anywhere between 40 and 50 grams of carbohydrates, and I'm telling you, you need to keep your entire day to below 25 grams a day. I'm not going to get into the nuance here. There's a group of people that will say, nope, it's gross carbs, and others that will say net carbs. That's not my argument. I'm not going to do anything about that. I usually follow the net carb method, and what net carb method is it's basically taking the total carbohydrates, minus out fiber, and minus out sugar alcohol to get your net carbs. Now, the reason why we don't count fiber or sugar alcohols is because the way our body processes those, they don't cause a spike in our insulin, and so we don't have to worry about those having the same effect as other carbohydrates would have. I have a keto ice cream that I eat all the time. I think one of the serving sizes, it says there's 22 grams of carbs in it. And so you look at that and go, oh my gosh, that's almost my entire day of carbs. No, because it also has 11 grams of fiber and it has 6 grams of sugar alcohol. Now, sugar alcohol and sugar alcohols, these are very natural. They're made usually by a stevia extract or an erythritol, both of which are very natural sugars that are found, in the wild, if you will, that have very minimal processing outside of like cane sugars, which are horribly processed. But if you look at that example, the 22 total carbs, 11 grams of fiber, 6 grams of sugar alcohol. When you minus those out, you're left with 5 grams of net carbs. And that's why you can enjoy that without having to think about it. And that's only a small portion of the carbs that you are allowed throughout the rest of your day. Ultimately, you have to decide which method you want to use. For me, net carbs has worked fantastic. Again, I've lost almost 80 pounds in the last 8 or so months. I'm still going and still doing this thing and still morphing things as I go along, but I have done everything I can to keep my net carbs to below 25 grams. And what's incredible is that when you start looking at the food list that's there, what you can eat, and the things that you can actually enjoy, it's actually not as hard as it may sound. At first, it's going to require a huge mindset change, which again, I'll talk about another time, but it can be done, and it can actually be done relatively easily. Okay, so to wrap this up, I'm hoping that you can see, just from my very elementary overview of the ketogenic diet, that you at least shouldn't just write it off. You shouldn't just throw it away or say, oh, all the hype, I just don't want to mess with it. At least give it a shot. Give it a second look and see what you think. There are tons of studies out there that are showing its benefits for things like, literally, there are people that have been taking insulin for years that within a few months of being on the ketogenic diet are no longer taking insulin, which means they're effectively, I will say, cured, if you will. Not quite cured, but you get my point. They're no longer type 2 diabetics. They're not taking insulin, or at least they're being able to live a normal life without the use of insulin. There are people out there that have ditched their high blood pressure medications. There are people out there that are no longer chronically inflamed or having chronic pain anymore because their bodies are now not inflamed. And also due to the fact that your brain tends to function really well when it comes to utilizing ketones, which is why a lot of people say a side effect of the ketogenic diet is mental clarity. They're also saying that there could be potential benefits for Alzheimer's, dementia, and other benefits like that. In fact, those of you that think that, well, ketogenic is just brand new and it's some fad diet, keep in mind that the ketogenic diet has actually been around since the early 1920s as a treatment for children that were having epileptic seizures because of the effect of it on the brain. And of course, let's not overlook the superficial benefits of extreme weight loss, improved hair, improved skin, improved nails, all the other things that come along with it, which, let's just say, is not exactly a bad thing. In my next video, I'll talk about why I chose keto and try to expand on some of the ideas that I talked about earlier on in this video. So thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.